Angela, I've been excited to be a part of the way you guys, and I'm a part of the group too now, that approach our legislators. That's a weird thing in Louisiana, that people are afraid that they shouldn't waste their time even contacting legislators. But I've found it works for me, and now I'm excited to be part of a group that, but what's my take is that the group's had a great success so far in this last quarter. What are you finding out? Because you kind of have collated all of that information, but it's been a great experience for me.
Yeah, no, I've actually enjoyed it. Like, I love getting to know legislators as human beings, and you don't get that during session. And so being able to just talk to them before redistricting even started, just reaching out, having a conversation, getting to know why they chose the transportation committee, getting to know what the concerns are. We're all pretty much on the same page. It's just really figuring out, because I think the system is so messy and confusing, even for decision makers and officials, of like, what are things we should stop? And it's hard, I think, when you're in it. Like, it's 2022. It is hard to go back and say 30, 40 years ago, what should we have done things? How should we have done things differently? Or 100 years ago, how should we have developed differently in these places? But I think our campaign is really helping folks to sit back and say, wait, just because we could doesn't mean we should. And just because we could find a way to tackle that $14 billion backlog doesn't mean we should break our backs trying to do it. Like, it is okay to change and to pivot and to let a thing go. And it's okay for us to let go of this insurmountable amount of money that is necessary to feed a system that is going to be always asking for more. And I also think one part of it is with the price of gas going up. And I think more and more, especially amid this pandemic, people are recognizing, for so long, Americans in general, we're not paying the true cost of things. We don't pay the true cost of our roads. We don't see that. We don't see the true cost of me living in, a suburb parish, and like how the taxpayers of that city subsidize me going back and forth to my rural home because I don't want to live in this particular city. And we also don't see the true cost of roads and bridges, and then we don't pay our fair share as far as taxes. Well, to be fair, we should be taxing the rich, but that's a whole nother conversation. So like, and rich folks don't, in this huge state with all of these exemptions for taxes, especially for the wealthy and for corporations, they don't truly contribute what they need to be contributing to our state either. So yeah.
Well, and here in Caddo Parish, we've had discussions with a group of folks that live in the rural part of the parish that don't want a lot of imposition of rules. They talk about their land rights and how important it is for them to keep ducks, pigs, chickens, whatever, on their land in the numbers that they feel comfortable with. And yet they don't like us talking about certain guidelines for how they should construct their different buildings on their land. At the same point, the citizens of Shreveport are also paying Caddo Parish taxes, and they perhaps forget that they used to drive on dirt roads to get into town, but we paved a whole lot. We spread a whole lot of asphalt and concrete around that we can't afford to keep up, and they could not do it by themselves. We're all in this together, but I enjoyed talking to northern representatives, senator and they talked about keeping the rural roads paved. There's no money to pave rural roads in Natchitoches Parish. Talking about how if we have rail that goes from Shreveport to Monroe, for instance, or Shreveport to New Orleans, that takes cars off of the highways and makes more room for the truckers to get their stuff to market, but also reduces the wear and tear on the roads because we all share transit instead of all tearing up highways together. It's been an amazing process. What were you hearing when you were interviewing? And I know you said it on one of our interviews, but I was surprised at how engaged these guys were on these committees.
Yeah, I'm actually really grateful. I think it's also because it's like, it's an uber political committee, but it's not an uber political committee. Like, it's not like D and R aren't as, like, being a Democrat versus a Republican is not as divisive of a thing, I think, with the transportation committee, which I find really refreshing. Like, you don't really have to, it's not like the other fights I've had, right? Like, it's not like guns, which even in Louisiana, representatives and senators surprise you with the stances they end up taking, and that's refreshing too. So honestly, I guess it's just Louisiana in general. Our legislature isn't completely balls to the walls, and so it creates a lot of room for being human beings. And I think at the end of the day, all of us are recognizing it's going to be hard, but there's some serious culture, change that is required for us to actually intentionally change our state for the better. And more legislators that we meet with, particularly in the transportation committees, are open to that reality and saying, okay, how can we be better using this money? Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. And I think it's also kind of a relief for them that we're coming in saying, yeah, so you don't have to tackle that $14 billion backlog. Like, what if you just throw it off the paper, And like, it requires law, like they can't just throw it off, and it requires process, but just like there's relief there. It's like the to-do list that you never get to, and we're just telling you, let it go, like live your best life, pick a couple projects that make sense, but like don't kill yourself trying to do everything, because it's a never-ending process, and we just need a new system.
I like how you said that. Just let it go. Just let it go.
Yeah.
Live your best life. Go out and do some things you really want to do. Let it go.
There's no way to get all that done. The Biden money doesn't even begin to address the 14 billion backlog in new stuff we'd love to build, much less the backlog and all the repair. It's really a total of 28 billion. We can't tax our way out of that, and they can't print the money fast enough in DC and truck it in here. So we have to let some of that go. And I think in some places in northern parts of the country where the roads decay even faster because of the cold weather and because of the salt, the bridges, where we've seen that happen, where bridges just collapse because they have to salt them. We don't do that here because it takes 10 years off the life of the bridge. But they're having to say, we got to let some of this infrastructure go and go back to gravel roads and certain less traveled areas or dirt roads. And we were like, we're Americans. We can build concrete all over everywhere, but we can't. It's too expensive. It's been a fascinating last year, just learning that these people really are human beings. They care about this stuff too. They're not mean people that you bring up a subject like that and they're like, oh yeah, that sounds reasonable. And now you have a conversation started. Is what if we just rode on trains and took tires off of the street?
Now, I do have a question for you, because we're talking about how there's not a big gap in our expectations, or a big gap in what even they believe we can accomplish. So why do you think the system is so confusing or convoluted? Or do you think it's the private entities that are embedded within these the halls lobbying for certain things? Is that the reason why that we only see the divisiveness?
Yeah. So it's like John said earlier too, though, right? Like, a lot of people don't realize how accessible this is. For so long, people just say like, oh, and I have my sister, her name's Caitlin, and they're just like, oh, Angelle and Caitlin, like, that's your thing. And it's like, no, like, you literally could call your legislator anytime you want, and they'll get back to you if they don't immediately answer, but hopefully they'll get back to you. But people think it's like a hobby. Like, advocacy is just something that all of us just do, and you're born with the tick for it, or you're not. And like, the reality is, I don't think before we were doing this, there were many people that were coming together kind of under a because I say Sierra Club Delta chapter, but I don't necessarily like, I don't lead with that. Not because Sierra Club, of course, we're known for like being climate all in, but like more so because I want it to be clear that we are volunteers, and we are community members, and we are like family members and parents, and just folks that love Louisiana. And so while the Sierra Club was kind of is kind of the hub for this, our campaign, it's called Fair Access Ride Equity, and the campaign just kind of speaks for itself. And so I think we're some of the few people, other than Four Corners, really doing this because it's been so messy and over the years it's been unchallenged. I think we're kind of making a splash just because we're the only ones who just were like, oh wait, we should probably start commenting on these things that other folks had no idea existed. So it's no one's real fault. I just think when governments are developing and they're growing and they're constantly developing niche and specializations, and then COVID happens and they don't talk to each other as much because they're not getting in a room together, things just get on the books that don't complement each other. And so whether it's the planning commission and planning organizations, whether it's DOTD itself, whether it's the transit services themselves advocating, or the local mayors, they're not all trying to create this master plan. And so that's part of the divisiveness. And then of course, on the back end of that, I just think Louisiana has completely blurred the lines between business and public good. And there are far too many business oriented or like chamber of commerce type organizations that are pushing in, backdoors, closed conversations for a vision that they haven't asked us if we want. And so it's just being seen as the expectation and the status quo, because a lot of us don't realize, like, for example, and I might be a little petty with this, but like, just being honest, we've, been focused on the Baton Rouge to New Orleans rail. A lot of people are basically saying that's a done deal. Well, first things first, we can influence the governor's budget and we plan to do that. Secondly, and the rail is not even in that budget, but like a piece of it through Ascension Parish is because it's easy for these private interests that have all the time in the world, while we're doing this very transparent campaign, they're pushing for the exact opposite behind closed doors, and they have the money to do it. And so like we have to push back on them. And then also the other thing I was going to say, they act as though the mega projects they have proposed are done deals, but we're finding out from different agencies at the federal and state level, they haven't even gone through, NEPA processes or environmental assessment processes. They're just telling us it's a done deal because they have the influence to get it done. And so it's our job to really try and get the public to understand, like, no, comment here, tell them what you want, and we will help you figure out where to plug in. But we're not going to tell you what you want. You've got to decide what is your vision for Louisiana. We will let folks know we want electrification. We want to center people and climate over profit, but it's just going to take a lot of work to get to all those different entities, while the business community has been churning for decades with what they want to see. Because for them, it's all about development. And we don't need more development in a state where we're divesting from communities that could use a lot more love and financial support. And then also we have other parishes that if they're not just divesting from Black and brown areas or poor areas in general, they're also building in floodplains and then flooding and shocked why they're flooding. And so there's just complete, process that it's not even a process. There's just so many different processes we're trying to influence at once. But because we're there, it shocks them. And I think that's part of why we're getting noticed, is because for so long, no one was like, hey, like, what are you doing?
Yeah. I heard John say, when you said something about building in the floodplain, and then get like, oh my God, it flooded. Yeah, you built it in the floodplain. Ain't that right, John?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Or, oh my God, that bridge only lasted 40 years and now we've got to rebuild it and there's no money to rebuild it. That seems to shock them sometimes. Yeah. So, but then they start building another bridge right next to it. Now it has a sister span. Now you got two bridges 40 years later that'll need to be rebuilt. And that's in the future. So they don't think about the totality of everything they're doing. And I guess they don't have to until you come along. When are you going to run for mayor? How long before you're finished with school and you're running for mayor? That's what I want to know. Right. What about governor? You're great on all of these topics, but you almost are the person we need in politics, is the people who actually seem to care. Sometimes I think there's too many people that are more about feathering their own nest in politics than about doing what's really great for the people of the state, the parish, the city. Have you thought about politics?
I hear it quite a bit lately, and it's so funny because with moms, Moms Doing Action is always like, you have to be asked 7 times as a woman before you'll say yes. I'm sure it's been more than 7 times, but my focus is just to finish school, which God willing is next May, so May 2023, and then we'll see what's after that. Like, I'll go where God wants me to. I'm hoping it's not politics, because I'm just like, I'm so honest. Somebody would like punch me, you know. But like,
Well,
you
we
know,
need you to stay in Louisiana, so I hope you'll
I
stay
will.
here and